This is the most worrying part of the budget for me. There's a statement in there by the minister. He says that we now have 28 million South Africans on social grants. 28 million. And he celebrates it.
Yes.
He says this reflects our commitment to reducing poverty and inequality. Now that's the ANC's understanding of how to build an economy. Now, in my understanding, and that doesn't reflect an economy that is thriving. It actually reflects an economy that is.
Guys, I knew there had to be some kind of disconnection between the government's understanding of this whole thing with SASSA and the whole pursuit to fight poverty in South Africa, especially for the majority Black South Africans. I always felt that there was a disconnect, and that's why when I came on this channel, as you guys will recall, I've never had positive comments about SASSA. Because, SASSA, I really think this whole thing with social grants, I think it's really good. Don't get me wrong. I think it's really good. But, it should be established in a country or within a space where there's productivity, where there's a little, not even a little, an appreciable amount of productivity, a productionist ethos, a people who actually understand the meaning and the visions and the objectives of what it means to be productive, and then have the profits or probably the excess. This is how I would do it if I was an economist of this kind of society. So my people will produce so much, and then the excess that comes out of that production, and when we're all fed and okay, then we have some of that excess now pumped into a certain system that helps to cater for those who might not be able to produce, or probably are not able to produce after a certain age. This is how I see the whole thing with the welfare state. This is how I would, try to really process and understand it. But when I look at Africa generally, not even just South Africa alone, the whole continent, bro, sometimes, we in academia, when some presentations about the whole thing with development and indicators and all that, when an African economist comes to really make these kinds of presentations, I almost sometimes want to walk out of the room, because, the indicators are not pointing, to a good standing for Africa, The poverty, the lack of infrastructure development, the unemployment levels, the illiteracy rate, a lot of problems, all right? And so to have all of that and still institute a social grant system, on the short run, it might be good. On the short run, it sounds appreciable, because now that there's so much suffering and so much poverty, a certain social grant system could cater for these poor people. But when you think about the retroactive effect it has on the people, it is slowly creating a certain feedback cycle, a dependency way of viewing the world that defies that whole definition of the fact that to really fight poverty, you really need to step up your game in productivity, especially at the level of government. There's no two ways about it. The economy has to be growing. And growing not just by, I saw a video yesterday that said, it's possible for GDP, gross domestic product, the indicators for GDP, to rise as a result of an influx of, human bodies, in other words, immigration, and then that could actually increase the tax base, and then it could actually feel like the country has a really, increasing GDP, but yet within there's really no productivity, and people are not able to afford the prices of goods and services. And so the kind of productivity I mean is a productivity where the government intentionally wishes or intentionally puts policies down that help the people get to serve their nation productively, and also have a certain dignity that they go to work every day, they engage in some productive activity that really feeds them probably has some excess to even extend to feed the nation. And then the collective excess could then be channeled into the formation of a certain social security system. This would actually be the way I would see the whole emergence of a social grant system in Africa. But right now, we're at a place where we are at such a low that we really do not, I don't think it's wise to place our people on a kind of like this whole dependency thing where people sit down at the end of the month, they expect that the government that is not engaging in productivity, this government should now continuously provide for their needs. And how much is this provision? 350 rand, if I got that correctly. If I convert that to euros, I spoke about the other time, it was about 17-18 euros thereabout. This is how much the people have been conditioned to believe that probably if I have this, then my life could go on. This is not sustainable. If I'm able to really try to really press, it's not sustainable. And so now Prince Mashele is actually opening my mind to really help me understand that this might be, I don't know if it's true, but that he's arguing that this is the ANC's way to see its poverty alleviation program. In other words, the fact that he's angry, Prince Mashele is angry here, that the Minister of Finance in the last budget presentation speech was celebrating the fact that there are now 28 million South Africans on some form of social grant or the other. And that is an indicator that, South Africa is moving forward in the fight against poverty. And I'm even really confused when I think about it. Let's quickly listen to Prince Mashele break down. This is complex, man. Let's listen to Mashele quickly.
Prince.
Yeah, look.
Adrian Gore was here. He said, as an entrepreneur, you need optimism. I'm going to start from there. So maybe I'm an entrepreneur, I'm too optimistic. I had Helen Ziller sitting here telling us, coalition government starts now. The discussion with the deputy president was exactly the same. And I said that to him. Do you mean you've learnt that the coalition starts now? And in an oblique way, he agreed. Is this where it begins from a political perspective, that now we're going to start seeing action, whereas in the past it was just lip service?
You see, the budget, to the way I understand it, you must ask whose budget is this? If you want to understand, is this the budget of a government of national unity? Does it reflect a government of national unity? Or does it reflect the DA? Or does it reflect the ANC? That's the question. When I read it, and it's the essence of it is this. It is a typical ANC budget. Let me give you 2 or 3 things. Number 1, debt to GDP ratio up, approaching the 77% mark of the World Bank, which is the danger zone. The ANC, that's how it operates. It raises that. That's number 1. Number 2, the public servants wage bill up. This year is going to be 7.3 billion. Next year it's rising again. And the third year, it actually goes above 8 billion. So that's the second thing. The third thing, and this is the most worrying part of the budget for me, there's a statement in there by the minister. He says that we now have 28 million South Africans on social grants. 28 million. And he celebrates it. Yes. He says this reflects our commitment to reducing poverty and inequality. Now that's the ANC's understanding of how to build an economy. Now, in my understanding, and that doesn't reflect an economy that is thriving. It actually reflects an economy that is moving backward, because an economy that is thriving must offload more and more people from the social grant system. That's what we should be appreciating, not adding more and more people. So over the past 30 years, the ANC has been adding people to our social grant system. So the core of it is this. This is a typical ANC budget. Coalition starts now. That's what they must fight to pull the ANC back, because the ANC is going up in terms of the budget. They must pull the ANC back. Then I will say they are winning.
It was
It sounds to me that the DA, obviously through Mark, their problem with this budget is this 0.5% VAT increase. Doesn't say anything else other than that. I didn't hear anything else other than that. If that is the case, it's actually the easiest to solve. They accept the whole budget. The only thing they don't accept is this 0.5 percentage point. That's what I'm hearing. So they will have to negotiate that between them and the ANC. And if they negotiate, there are two possible outcomes, and there is no middle ground. One, either the ANC drops that, or the DA accepts that. It's just no middle ground. And one of them will have to give in. I'm not sure if it's going to be the DA or the ANC, but certainly one of them will give in. That's one. Two, I agree with Gaitu. You cannot afford to have the DA out of this journey. Full stop. Under the circumstances, if the DA is out, the EFF is in, that's a doomsday scenario. And all of us as South Africans, we are going to be extremely unhappy with the DA walking out of this. So when you fight, keep that in mind. But the options is either you accept or the ANC drops it.
Yeah, so you could hear from Mashele, he actually speaks about how the indicator for a thriving economy should be one that pulls people out of SASSA and gives them the tools and the machineries for them to really contribute to the productivity that the nation really needs to thrive. I was reading the biography of Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, and I think there was a part of some of the research done on how he helped transform Singapore, and there was a commitment that was placed on the people of Singapore to save as much as, I think, a little bit close to half of their earnings, all right? So they had to save, maybe let's just give a hypothetical figure, probably 30-35% thereabout. That had to be saved into the quotas, the personal quotas by the people. Now, we know that, the banks in nations have what has been called a deposit ratio, something like that. I think if I remember that term, it actually refers to how much the bank in a country is required to keep and use the rest for development purposes or loans and all of that. So in Singapore, people had to be so productive that at the end of their productivity, they were able to save as much as, I think, 30, 35, 40% of their income and still be able to live on the rest and still go to work without, I know it must have been a turbulent time anyway, but the people were conditioned to really understand that they needed to really stand up for their nation, build the nation, and over the long term, see where Singapore is today. I think there was one research that even compared the fact that Singapore and one African country, I don't know now if it's the DRC or Ghana, but there was one African country that in the 60s, Singapore and that country were on the same level of economic growth, GDP and all of that. But today, Singapore has left that country. Singapore is now even almost considered to be what now many people have even called a first world country. And I was listening to the interview by Chen Zhao. I think he's the CEO of TikTok. Dude, the dude is sharp. I think he's Singaporean. I actually used to think that the CEO was a Chinese, but I think he's Singaporean who incorporated TikTok in China. ByteDance, that's the company. So the whole thing with the Chinese drama around TikTok. But anyway, the CEO, I think his interview at a TED Talk is on YouTube. Really sharp dude. So Singapore has been producing these minds that they were almost at the same place where many African countries were in the 60s. But they've developed their people, developed economies and all that. People have a productionist mindset, an entrepreneurial mindset, a mindset of giving to the nation and not necessarily expecting to have. And this is how our people have now been conditioned, you see, to always expect that the government will drop some peanuts into their pockets, and at the end of the day, you know, probably that allegiance could then be sold for votes, and then, bro, that's man, I really don't. So as Prince Mashele is speaking here in this video, that, you know, the ANC sees the indicator of the increase in the number of dependents on a system to the tune of 28 million as an indicator, a positive indicator in the fight against poverty, then truly, I really don't know. I am speechless, and I really have no comments anymore. But anyway, I don't know. What do you guys think? For me, I think it's really troublesome, and let's have a robust conversation in the comments. Let's share your thoughts. What do you think about the fact that Prince Mashele argues that in the budget speech by Minister Godongwana in the last presentation of the budget, it felt like as though he was proud that South Africa has 28 million people on some form of SASSA grant in South Africa. Share your thoughts in the comments.